Hello, welcome back to Aetheral Space 11.42, The Shape of This World. We are back.
Yes. Tan, from now on, I'm going to have you mute when you type. Smile.
I'll never
or
type again.
Quieter. You have to edit your story.
I'll never let go, Jack.
You'll have to tap your fingers maybe a crumb quieter, or perhaps move the mic away. But we are here with The Shape of This World. The War of the Worlds is finally over. Can you believe it? And on the number 42, no less? Is this what the hitchhiker was talking about?
I actually noticed that when I was writing. I was like, oh, 42.
Well.
As a nerd, I understood the reference.
Can I be honest? I read the first
Geeks
Hitchhiker's Guide.
assemble!
I read the first Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy book in middle school. I literally don't remember anything about it other than the very beginning premise and the 42.
I've never read it, to be honest. I think I saw a bit of the movie.
I read it. I remember it being funny, but it's like, apparently it's a whole series, and it was a radio drama prior, and I don't remember basically anything except that.
It's also a adventure game, I think.
Probably. Anyway.
Notoriously difficult, if I remember my lore.
You ready for this?
Absolutely.
Akhlima ran so hard that her feet hurt. It was no surprise she was in pain. Sorry, why do I have so much fun every time when we record?
It's no surprise that he was in pain.
It was no surprise she was in pain. Ever since her pod had come down on the surface of Elysian fields, she'd been sprinting through this wasteland, heading as fast as she could to the green and gold aurora she could see on the horizon. Horrors flashed past at the edges of her vision, corpses and conditions she'd never considered. But she did not stop to look at them. She had a job to do, after all. She had to help her father. She had to show him that she wasn't as weak as everyone thought. She had to prove that she existed now. And yet her legs screamed at her, feeling like matchsticks about to snap under their own weight. Aether, especially newborn Aether, could only do so much, especially with a body that was pushing itself far past its limits. Akhlima blinked rapidly as her sweat dripped into her eyes, and she panted raggedly as her lungs protested their treatment. Finally, she had no choice but to stop. Hands on her knees, gasping for breath, she leaned against the charred remains of a tree. Just a second to recover, that was all she needed. As soon as she could move again, it'd be straight back to running. "What are you doing here?" asked Toy Muzazi. Akhlima looked up at the man looming over, and immediately recoiled, collapsing into the mud. Muzazi had changed since she'd last seen him. His uniform was caked with dirt and mud, torn all over, but that wasn't what had surprised her. She didn't know how it had happened, but the special officer had clearly suffered a grievous injury. The skin on the left side of his face was utterly gone, revealing bloody flesh and muscle beneath. The eye on that side, too, was a dull white orb, half-crushed, clearly seeing nothing. Doesn't your gun also have a fucked eye?
He is like a fucked everything right now.
Akhlima swallowed back bile at the gruesome sight. "Your face," she whispered. "It's nothing," Muzazi replied, his voice in exhausted monotone. "What are you doing here, Akhlima? It's not safe. I told you to stay on the ship." Akhlima shook her head, slowly picking herself up off the ground. "The ship's not safe either. They attacked it. There was a woman with these feathers, and Ash beat her, but the commissioner's aide showed up too and fought us. And then the second contender sent one of her tree things, and..." Muzazi shook her head.
No, so he shook his head. He didn't grab her head and shake it.
Congratulations, Muzazi, on your transition.
I pictured him like reaching out, just like shaking her head back and forth, like no.
It was unclear if he'd even really heard her words. "Nevertheless," he said, "the Tartarus is a safer place than here. Why did you come?" Akhlima's mouth opened silently at first, her weakness returning, before she hurriedly shook her head and declared, "I need to help my father!" "The Supreme doesn't need help," Muzazi said slowly, blinking in surprise. "And you would not be able to help him. Even I..." "I can help!" Akhlima insisted, taking a step forward. She raised her hands up, purple aether sparking around her fingers. "I unlocked it, and I beat a contender! Did you see that big black tree? I think that was me!" "That's splendid. Nevertheless," Muzazi mumbled, "you've only just unlocked that aether. I am proud of you, but you're not capable of fighting with the Supreme as you are right now. Few are. People like you and I would be annihilated in the crossfire, and the enemy is strong. I faced him myself. He's too dangerous." The special officer seemed to sway on his feet as he spoke. How much blood had he lost? Too much at a glance. Was that why he wasn't listening? I've got an ability! Aklyma said, annoyance trickling into her tone as she threw her hands wide. I can! It can beat Aether! I beat Paradise Karen and it was easy! I'm strong! You're not! Musashi barked. The air in the clearing seemed to grow still as Aklyma blinked, looking up at the special officer like she hadn't understood what he'd said. Like it had been a different language. Still, after all of this, after everything that had happened, he still thought she was weak? Cold realization settled in her stomach. When he looked at her, all Atoy Musashi saw was a weakling, and that was all he'd ever see. That cold realization was quickly replaced by hot anger. You're not, Musashi repeated, more softly, but it was too late. By unlocking Aether, you've taken the first step, but... Move! Aklyma snapped, pushing past Musashi, and that was when her consciousness stopped. She had no way of knowing this, of course, but at the exact moment she'd walked past Atoy Musashi, the special officer had struck her on the back of the neck with a cold and precise chop. Her eyes rolled back up into the back of her skull as she keeled over, and she would have collapsed to the ground fully if Atoy Musashi hadn't caught her, holding her up his side. Was that right? Asked the voice of Morgan Noct. Musashi looked up and saw Noct perched up in the scorched remains of a nearby tree. Branches were protruding from his back, holding him in place, and his eyes were coated with green moss. It didn't take a genius to work out who was really speaking. No!
Sorry?
That's what bothers me about why... That took me till now to realize. That's what bothers me about why Der Freischütz didn't get, the Hellhound. Because she used her curse thing, which is basically Der Freischütz.
It's a different ability.
On a fucking summon of a thing. On a ship above the planet. And then that still affected Karen.
It's a different ability. The bullet uses the ether as fuel for an explosion that it comes into contact with. That's how it is, I'm sorry.
Audience, kill him. Is Morgan dead? Musashi asked, his voice dull. At this point, he didn't have anything close to surprise left in him. Noct's body shook its head. Morgan Noct is only unconscious, Aenir Yggdrasil explained. But was it correct for you to subdue Aklyma? She wanted to fight. Take her, Musashi grunted, passing Aklyma's limp body into the reach of a stretching branch. If she fought, she would have died. There is nothing but enemies here. Enemies and corpses. It's as I told her. Even if she's grown stronger, this is far beyond her abilities, as is the Supreme. I see. Aenir took Aklyma into his grasp, holding her up high. I will take her to medical treatment. The surviving simpletons tell me a location. What will you do? Atoy Musashi took in a deep breath once more, and a deep step forwards, facing away from Aenir, and towards the green and gold mountain on the horizon. With a flash of white, a radiant began blazing resolutely from his palm. The warrior exhaled. What? Is there some background noise on your thing?
Not that I know of.
Weird. I promised Aklyma before all this began, he muttered, that I would aid the Supreme in her place. And without another word he became a blur of white light, burning his way across the world. Dragon Hadrian reappeared between his friends, gasping for air as his lungs came back into existence. Holy shit, holy shit! Maybe he'd gone a little overboard? The destruction of the slipstream AE, rest in peace, had left a massive crater, filled with copious fire and smoke.
Thank you for your service.
Even looking at the bright inferno was enough to make one's eyes hurt, and the flames were already beginning to spread to the rest of the virulent forest Wu Ming had grown here. It was tempting to think nothing could have survived that, but that was the sort of thought that ended with you turning your back and getting your head cut off. This was a contender, after all, the first contender. Something like that could definitely have survived that. To his left, Ruth cracked her neck, her flickering claws reflecting the dim pink moonlight. To his right, Serena planted a hand on a nearby tree, turning it into a gargantuan sword and slinging it over her shoulder. And behind him, he knew, even without looking, that golden green light was blazing in the distance. The battle Skipper was waging against the Supreme. The battle that everyone was giving everything just to facilitate. So long as they could keep Avaman away from that light, even if just for a little longer, they could crack. It was the tiniest noise, like drinking glasses tapping together, but in the tension of that place it resounded like a church bell. The sound had more than one source. The sound came from Dragon Hadrian. The sound came from Ruth Blaine. The sound came from Serena Del Ced. More than anyone else, though, the sound surely came from Skipper. Dragon looked down at what remained of his lapel. Most of his body was still recorded into Aether to keep it stable, but the top of his chest was still part of reality. He looked down at it, and did not see what he expected to see. His eyes widened. The green feather had just broken. It was the same for Ruth, and it was the same for Serena. The glowing green feathers Skipper had given them had suddenly shattered, dissipating into emerald aether. Dragon's stomach sank, and as he swung his head around to look at the horizon, he saw that golden green aurora there was receding as well. Receding. Fading. Dying. His mouth felt terribly dry. His eyes felt terribly wet. Pain he tried to ignore started to creep back through his nerves. For a moment, Dragon nearly lost his concentration, nearly lost the one thing that was keeping his body together. But then he heard Ruth, heard her voice, and was pulled back to reality once more. "Help him!" she was screaming, her eyes just as wide as his, spittle flying from his mouth. Congratulations on your transition, Ruth. "Help Skipper! We'll finish him off!" Serena's teeth were bared.
Unlocks her new ability to make spittle fly out of other people's mouths.
Yeah, I see you've gotten really attracted to spittle flying from mouth this arc. It's happening a lot.
Because everyone's so shouty.
I don't like it as much as eyes wide, and it's gross.
Little more is gross.
Serena's teeth were bared, and Dragon could see that she was shaking. Whether that was from rage or sorrow, he couldn't tell. The cracks that spread across the hilt of her greatsword as she squeezed it sent a far clearer message. She glanced at him, and her voice was even and calm as she spoke. "Oh, what?" Is this intentional?
Yeah.
So this is the first true no italicize. Wow. How do I deliver this line? How should I do this? "I think you should go, Mr. Dragon."
That's it.
He didn't need to be told a third time. As Ruth and Serena lunged at the flaming crater, Dragon ran in the opposite direction, feet pounding against the grass as he headed for the fading light on the horizon. That light was hope. That light was Skipper. He couldn't just let it go out. Even if he ran at full speed, of course, it would take him ages to get there. But he wasn't the sort of person who needed feet to get around. Throat burning, he screamed out, "Gemini World!" Aetheral Space, 11.42. The shape of this world. Does this imply that was last chapter? We've read this
I just
far?
wanted to have a feel like, you know when you watch like a series and it's usually like an opening, but then one episode it comes and it's just like the title comes up, you're like, oh shit.
So this is your version of a literary cold open?
Yeah.
That's actually hilarious. I love, like, I'm not even making fun of it. That's kind of cool, but it's also like hilarious. I love you so much. Never change. Devastation. The moment Dragon reappeared, feet sliding against unsteady ground, the sound of burning filled his nostrils. Burning wood, burning grass, burning stone, and burning flesh. Burning everything! It was like he'd arrived in the aftermath of an inferno that had devoured the world, and yet not a single flame remained. The battlefield was a mess of rubble, landscape smashed to pieces again and again and again, until the distinction between architecture and nature disappeared. Vast, indistinct shapes drifted past Dragon's vision as he ran through the wasteland, blue aether coiling around his arm as a rudimentary torch, additional light burning from his eyes. The night had fully claimed Elysian fields now, and, aside from the occasional pink flickers from above, it was nearly impossible to see what was in front of you. As Dragon ran, searching the battlefield, he didn't know his exact destination, but in his sinking heart, he already suspected what he might find there. If you asked Dragon Hadrian how long he searched, he wouldn't have been able to tell you. It all melded together in his head. That desperate run through the end of the world, hoping against hope that he was wrong. It could have been a few seconds, a few minutes, maybe even hours. All that mattered was that the search eventually came to an end. The idea that should have occurred to Dragon long ago, an aether ping was followed up on, and he followed the nearly undetectable response. He found the Supreme first. A massive silhouette suddenly appeared from out of the darkness as he approached, faintly touched by moonlight. The man was on his knees, and remained so even as Dragon cautiously approached, feet crunching against the ash and soot below. The Supreme had sustained severe damage. His arms had been severed at the shoulders, and judging from the ragged state of the stumps, it hadn't been an easy cut. As Dragon reached the man, though, that wasn't what caught his attention. No, what caught his attention was the Supreme's head. It was lying on the ground before the Supreme, cleanly severed from the neck, lifeless, dead. Dragon let out breath it felt like he'd been holding for a lifetime, staggering backwards. To see the Supreme like this, to see the corpse of the Supreme, was almost inconceivable. It was like a cold star, and yet it was undeniable. It was right there, kneeling in its own blood, severed head still grinning its last grin. Even more than the head, though, the presence of the Supreme was gone. Dragon had only spent a short time near him, but there'd been a sort of pressure coming from the man, a sense that he had absolute control over his surroundings. Without that sensation, the body before him was just a body, an empty shell. The power of a god had abandoned it. He did it, Dragon whispered, disbelieving. He actually did it. Yep, said Skipper. Not bad, yeah? Dragon whirled around to face his captain, eyes shining and wide. Skipper was lying against an upturned chunk of rock, and in fact, Dragon had walked past him while he was approaching the Supreme. He just hadn't noticed. He hadn't noticed, because as he was now, it was difficult to tell Skipper apart from the rubble. His skin was charred and peeling away all over his body. His limbs were gone, each and all, oozing blood and mechanical fluid. One eye was a glazed-over white marble, while the other was all but closed. A few stray lumps of black hair still clung to his scalp, but most of that had burnt away as well. But most of all, the thing Dragon's eyes were drawn to was the gaping red hole in Skipper's chest, where the heart should have been. You could see the rock on the other side through that hole. His heart was gone. How was he still alive? Skipper grinned with broken teeth. Still got a few heartbeats saved up, he explained. Burned it through 'em pretty quick, though. Good thing you showed up when you did. You know, that's not how it works, but I'm gonna allow it because it's cool. Dragon blinked. As Skipper spoke, his mouth was not moving. No, the sound just seemed to come from the air around him. Even as he was using his aether to cling on to life, he was using it to speak. Do you need me to stop for a moment?
Yeah, one sec. Rocky, what are you doing? Okay.
What a crazy asshole. Dragon walked over, sitting on a chunk of stone next to Skipper. There was no point in trying to do anything else. They both knew that. Skipper wouldn't survive being transported to a medical facility, and even if Dragon managed it using Gemini World, there was no saving Skipper from these injuries. The shock of Panacea trying to grow a new heart would probably kill him all on its own. Still, if Dragon could record that heart, couldn't they at least try to... The thought came to a halt as Dragon looked at Skipper's ruined body and saw the man slowly shaking his head. The older man had known what he was thinking, of course. That wasn't a surprise anymore. Skipper had been smarter than him from the very beginning. So instead they talked. You killed him? Dragon asked quietly, throat dry. He didn't know why he asked. The evidence spoke for itself. You could say that, Skipper chuckled. How are things going on your end? So casual. Skipper was talking like once this was all over, they'd meet up on the ship again. They'd all fly away together again. It wouldn't happen. It couldn't happen. So why was he talking like that? Dragon didn't say any of those things. He said, We're holding out, I think. Ruth and Bruno and Serena. Last I saw them, they were fighting the first contender. That ugly bastard. Despite everything, Dragon chuckled. Yeah, I gave him a punch to the face for you. You're too kind. Skipper's good eye closed, and for a second Dragon thought that was it, before it fluttered open again. Ruth will beat him, I think. Yeah, she's got it in her. That's the kind of woman she is. Dragon swallowed. What are we meant to do now? He glanced over his shoulder at the hulking corpse. The Supreme is dead. We did it, so... Skipper tried to shrug, but he no longer had a body that was capable of shrugging. God's dead, he said simply. Time to run from the angels. I kind of blew up the ship, though. Well, damn, that was my favorite slipstream, kid. There are escape vessels stored in the pyramid, too, so go wild that... The pyramid blew up, too. And I'm sure those special officers have been destroying any escape craft they can find. Skipper sighed in sound, but not in action. I'll be honest, kid. Seems like you guys are screwed, but you'll figure it out. Dragon blinked and his eyes were wet with tears. Figure it out, he muttered. How's that? This is a disaster. Because you've got what it takes, Skipper smiled. I've always thought so. Look at you. A year ago you couldn't do much more than run and hide. Sorry for kidnapping you back then, by the way. Again, he had to chuckle. I think we're kind of beyond that. The point is, you grew. You grow damn quick, too. It's kind of scary. Just about 12 months and you're able to fight like you've been doing it for years. On my way here, Dragon said slowly, without really knowing why, I beat the commissioner. It was 2 against 1, and I won. It wasn't as if he was looking for approval. He just felt the need to tell Skipper that, while he still could. The smirk that tugged at Skipper's shredded lips didn't mean a thing. Oh, he's such a tsundere. You see, he said, that's it right there. That spark. I'm a little reluctant to call it killer instinct, but there you go. His eyes slid shut again for a moment before slowly opening once more. That's why I'm gonna have to be a little bit of an asshole again, kid. Dragon mirrored that smirk. When did you stop? Smart ass, Skipper said, and his eye flicked over to the Supreme's corpse, still looming behind Dragon. The voice that came next was far softer, far more contemplative. The Supreme is dead, but that's just a Supreme. The supremacy will keep on ticking once the next Supreme comes along. The system accounts for this. Hell, it's designed for this. Dragon's face fell, and his heart fell with it. A deathly chill crept through his veins. What are you saying? He asked, leaning in. That all this was pointless? Now that he was closer, he could see even Skipper's good eye was heavily glazed over. How much of the Supreme's corpse could he even see right now, even as he stared at it? Skipper pulled no punches. If we leave it here, yeah. We've wounded the supremacy, sure, but killed it? Nah. That's why I've got to be an asshole now. What do you mean? That near blind eye looked right into Dragon's. Can you make this stick for me, kid? The words Skipper said. To be honest, Dragon had half expected them, but that didn't make them any easier to swallow, nor any easier to accept. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes for a moment. Even the darkness behind his eyelids seemed oppressive right now, reflecting his doubts right back at him. That's impossible. There's no way I could manage something like that. You're asking too much. That's the sort of crazy shit only you could pull off. I'm not like you. I can't be like... But the words he'd said. I want to change it too! And the words he'd thought. The only one who decides what happens to me. Dragon opened his eyes. I'll do it, he said, resolute. He'd always thought Skipper was an annoyingly laid-back man, someone who acted like they didn't have a care in the world, even if that wasn't the case. But when Skipper heard those words, and the tension on his face evaporated for good, Dragon realized he had never seen this man relax, not once, not ever. The sheer peace on the burnt man's face was such that Dragon found himself jealous. Skipper breathed through his own mouth, closing his eyes. Wind blew across the wasteland. Dark pressed in, timid birds chirped. Unearthed insects clicked. Crumbling rock creaked. Shifting soot rustled. Burnt grass smoldered. Distant trees collapsed. The moon hung low. Skipper? Asked Dragon. There was no response. Skipper? Asked Dragon. There was no response. If you asked Dragon later on how long he remained there, crouched down next to Skipper's body, he couldn't have told you. It could have been seconds, minutes, or even hours. He simply remained, staring at someone who could never stare back, bracing himself for the moment he knew would eventually come. That moment was the only certain thing. Dragon stood up, took a deep, cold breath, and walked away. My nose is a little stuffy. Can you popcorn?
No problem at all. Atoy Musazi's legs ached. It was no surprise what with the speed he'd used to get here. Atoy Musazi's arms ached. That too was unsurprising. Atoy Musazi's head ached. Even this was expected. After all, he'd witnessed many flavours of hell today. A person who could see all of that without anguish was a person he wished neither to meet or be. When he saw the figure approaching, he nearly ignored it. His body was in no fit state to fight anymore, and his mind was at the breaking point. How easy it would be to see an enemy and simply let it walk past. But he was a special officer, and more than that, he was Atoy Musazi. He had no choice but to raise his blade. The white light of the radiant illuminated the incoming figure, the young man trudging through the woods, Dragon Hadrian. His head was cast downwards, and he was a patchwork man, crossed between aether and flesh, but that silver hair was unmistakable. Of course they would meet here. Dragon Hadrian, Musazi said, powering through the pain in his rasping voice. I am placing you under arrest. Relinquish any weaponry and place your hands behind your head. This was the one kindness Musazi could offer. He and Hadrian had fought together, after all, bled together, so he could at least extend this mercy. The boy could live eve of his life. He could survive and see another day. What manner of day that was remained to be seen, but so many hadn't even had that chance. And yet Dragon Hadrian continued to walk forward. He did not reply, nor did he look at Musazi. This, too, was not entirely unexpected. Musazi took a deep breath and pointed his radiant at Dragon, but the coadjutant spoke before Musazi could. Just 2 words, but they were enough.
Can I do the surrounding parts while you do the 2 words?
Sure.
I'm dead, I'm dead, I'm dead, I'm dead, I'm dead, I'm dead.
Get lost. In the end, all Atoy Musazi could do was stand there, frozen by that pressure, and watch as Dragon Hadrian silently stalked past. The coadjutant vanished into the darkness, and as the radiant flickered out of existence, so did the crownless.
Is Atoy Musazi crownless?
Yeah.
Oh. I can't believe Dragon has supreme pressure now.
He has resolve.
Wow. This is so good. So this was something I did predict, that at this halfway point Skipper would die and Dragon would take over. But it was still really good. Oh man, that was emotionally impactful. I wish my nose wasn't so fucking stuffy. So
it's because you're so sad.
I don't even know what my fun fact question would be for this week. Okay, how about this? When before this was the last time that Skipper was happy?
Probably when he was a kid.
Can you give me a specific memory?
When he was accepted into the Supreme Guard.
Oh.
That was like 100% unqualified happiness there.
Oh man, that's sad. And when was the last time Dragon was happy?
When they were watching that movie earlier in this arc.
Oh, my baby Dragon. Can you believe I just uttered that sentence?
The PSYOP has been so successful.
How far we've come from Arc 1.
Ooh, you love Dragon. Ooh.
Not well played. Wowee. Is this the last chapter of the arc?
It is not. We've got a little bit to go still.
Man, that's powerful. Alright, this one, the patrons are going to go crazy for this tomorrow.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.